Last time, the Braves encountered an old friend, but can they really bring themselves to trust Nashetania? Rokka, Braves of the Six Flowers, Volume 4. The first thing we see is a man lying flat on the ground. He is completely unable to move and has an insect fiend attached to the back of his neck. The only thing keeping him alive is the need to inform the Braves of Trickster's secret weapon, the Black Baron Bloom. Back at our group, we find Dazu giving everyone a history lesson. Apparently, after the previous generation of Braves defeated the evil god, Hayuha, the Saint of Time, didn't return home. She actually came back to the Howling Viollands to visit Dazu, Karjik, and Trickster. You see, these three are the only fiends able to feel empathy, and this is why she asks them for help with researching the evil god. Together, they uncovered many clues using her powers, though somewhere along the line, Dazu decided to coexist with the humans, causing the group to split apart. They each went their separate ways, and Trickster continued to research and ended up building a temple dedicated to the original saint of the single flower. It's at said temple that Trickster created a magic weapon known as the Black Baron Bloom. However, Dazu doesn't know anything more than its name. Our group then debates about whether or not this information is true, and after a lengthy discussion, they decide to investigate this Temple of Fate. However, they obviously don't trust Nashetania, so Fremi attaches a bomb to her leg as a form of insurance. With Dazu's help, they cross the canyon and head northwest toward the mountains. Along the way, they discuss who may be the seventh, which causes them to realize that Fremi, Adlet, and Rolonia are the only three people that Trickster hasn't tried to kill. Due to this, they lose some trust in Adlet, but Hans mentions that the seventh may not even realize they are the fake. After a while of hiking, Dazu and Hans go to scout ahead, as the rest of them take a break in a nearby hut. It's inside that Adlet finds a piece of debris, which he recognizes as a flute from his village. Everyone watches as his expression grows somber, and as he steps outside to recollect on the past.
Hey, wait for me, Adlet!
An unknown amount of time later, Hans and Dazu return holding a big grotesque-looking insect, and Dazu explains that this bug is actually part of Trickster's fiend known as Specialist Number 9, which is currently guarding the path to the Temple of Fate. Apparently this fiend has the ability to transform humans into a dead host, aka mindless super zombies, and there seems to be hundreds of them guarding this forest. Rolonia then exclaims that they must find a way to save the dead hosts, and everyone just looks at her like she's crazy. We then get another glimpse at Reiner, who is currently walking through the forest against his will. He thinks back to how he sacrificed himself to save Adlet, and how Trickster took their entire village to serve the evil god. As you'd expect, the humans were all treated like slaves, however Reiner eventually managed to escape, fleeing eastward and stumbling upon a dying woman. She turned out to be one of Trickster's researchers who helped to create the Black Baron Bloom. She claims the Saint of the Single Flower is still alive, and she even transferred Reiner a hint of the Saint's power. She then describes the Black Baron Bloom in detail to Reiner before peacefully passing away. It was shortly after this encounter that he was captured and turned into a member of the dead host. Though on very rare occasions, Reiner would briefly regain control of a single arm, which he would use to write messages. Rolonia is currently trying to convince everyone to save the dead host, and after a lot of consideration, Adlet tells her to just stop. Young Shamo even steps in, saying the Brave's job isn't to save humans, it's to defeat the evil god. Though even after all of this, Rolonia still refuses to give up. Nashetania then pulls Goldoff aside, asking him for help with testing whether or not Rolonia is a genuine Brave. The group arrives at the forest and is immediately confronted by a zombie, which Nashetania puts down. Adlet then takes a moment to explain the plan. Fremi and Mora are to form a makeshift sniper team and position themselves on a nearby hill. Hans will then create a distraction, luring a large portion of the zombies across a ravine before destroying the only bridge. This leaves Adlet, Shamo, Rolonia, Goldoff, Nashetania, and Dazu to carefully herd Specialist Number 9 into an open area for Fremi to take a shot. On paper, this is a great plan, however splitting up may give the 7th a perfect opportunity to make a move. Adlet's group begins pushing through the forest towards Specialist Number 9, though Relonia is frequently stopping to analyze the corpses. They hear an explosion off in the distance as they find themselves completely surrounded. Shamo vomits up her slave fiends, giving them enough wiggle room to keep moving forward. The battle is growing more fierce by the minute, but Relonia is still half-assedly fighting as she's focused on analyzing the zombies. Though it's due to her stubbornness that she finds a certain corpse with words carved into its flesh. This is a surprise to say the least, and it plants a seed of hope in the back of Adlet's mind. However, he hides it away, telling himself that this is just another of Trickster's ploys. They continue their assault but are unable to break through the dead host, causing Adlet to throw a smoke bomb, screaming for everyone to retreat. In actuality, Nashetania summoned a giant blade underneath Adlet, allowing him to jump high above the smoke in order to shower the enemy with grenades. Goldoff then charges straight through the zombies, with Shamo's slave fiends supporting him all around. Though it's around this time that Trickster finally realized what the Braves are up to, and it begins to move its forces toward the Temple of Fate. During the chaos, Number 9 managed to successfully escape, so the group takes a moment to get their bearings as Adlet recognizes a zombie as being a woman from his village. He snaps back to reality to realize that Relonia is missing, and they backtrack a bit to find her attempting to revive a fallen zombie. Adlet tells her there is no time for this nonsense, but instead of giving up, she hoists the body onto her back, continuing treatment and resuming the fight. Though the zombie dies a moment later, and Dazu begins to suspect that Relonia might be the 7th. The fighting continues for over an hour as they slowly but surely force Number 9 closer to the designated area. They decide to take a break and promptly finish off the immediate enemies as Relonia witnesses a zombie cry out for help, telling her to go to a cave. She frantically tells the others what she heard. However, Nashetania retaliates by pulling a fiend-attracting flute out of Relonia's armor, accusing her of being the 7th. Adlet fully supports Relonia in this argument, that is, until she states that she's going to investigate that cave. Shamo and Goldoff begin to surround her, but are forced to give up as dead hosts attack once again. They easily vanquish this wave and find that Relonia has run off on her own. Adlet immediately leaves the group to chase after her, passing by an unusual piece of cloth, sort of drifting through the air. It was a few moments earlier that Relonia was running through the forest alone, trying to think of a way to counter Nashetania's false accusations. Zombies attack and end up injuring her due to her refusal to fight seriously. She tries everything she can, but eventually has to face the reality of kill or be killed. Then it's during all of this fighting that she finds numerous zombies with words carved into their skin, specifically referring to Trickster's secret weapon. Jumping back in time, we see Relonia's Disney princess style backstory. What I mean by that is her parents died, she was abused, gained magical powers, and fell in love with Adlet while training alongside him. It was during one of their many late night conversations that Relonia decided she would do whatever she can to bring Adlet happiness. And this is why she's trying so hard to save the dead host, which contains Adlet's only family. Now, Reiner just so happens to be one of the zombies chasing Relonia, and he suddenly regains control of his arm. He uses this brief opportunity to punch a tree, use the blood to write on his sleeve, then rip it off, throwing it into the air. Reiner then loses control as his body begins battling one of Shamo's slave fiends. At this point, Relonia has escaped the eyes of the dead host and stumbles upon an alcove with an old woman inside. She immediately uses her whip to test the old woman's blood, verifying that she is indeed human. This woman doesn't know about the messages on the corpses, but she does know of a way to save the dead host. Because of this, Relonia follows her to a cave where she finds a spider fiend surrounded by zombies. The old woman says the spider is part of the process that turns people into the zombies for Number 9 to control, and Relonia wastes no time charging straight into the cave. She cuts her wrist and uses her very own blood as a weapon to instantly annihilate the spider. She then begins to inspect a corpse as the old woman runs toward her.
No, get away from her!
Adlet throws a paralysis needle at the woman, but Relonia dives in front of her, taking the poison and collapsing. A snake fiend instantly erupts from the ground, restraining Relonia, while a dead host charges forward. Adlet fires his sword gun, implanting the blade into the zombie's skull, though this only bought Relonia a moment as Adlet watches her be swarmed and murdered. Until suddenly, one of the zombies absolutely slaughters all of the enemies. Adlet looks closer to realize that it's actually Hans, who has disguised himself as a zombie, even going as far as tying a bug to the back of his neck. Hans is obviously very confused as to how all this happened, so Relonia explains everything and shows them the writing which specifically mentions Trickster's secret weapon. Hans still thinks this is just an elaborate trick. However, Adlet now believes that someone is alive among the dead host, though they had no way to know that Reiner was missing 2 legs, 1 arm, and bleeding out on the ground. Shamo's group has finally lured number 9 to the proper area, so Goldoff orders Shamo and Nashetania to back away, just in case Fremy turns out to be a traitor. Mora is a long ways away, camouflaged in a bush, using her mountain magic to get a bird's eye view of the battlefield.
Tell me when.
Now! Adlet's group is in the middle of another battle when the zombies suddenly collapse to the ground. They immediately realize that they were victorious, but that also means their unknown informant will die in a matter of minutes. Adlet then remembers the cloth floating through the air and sprints off in that direction. He arrives and begins yelling at the top of his lungs. However, he doesn't get a response. It's not until he calms down that he hears a very faint song that he recognizes from his village. They rush to the corpse and Relonia immediately begins treatment. Adlet gives him some water and finally recognizes this to be Reiner, his childhood friend. And Hans forces Adlet to be quiet in order to give Reiner a chance to speak. The very frail and weak Reiner explains that the Black Baron Bloom has the power to absorb each of the Brave's crests, and he also gives a physical description of the weapon. Reiner then says that Adlet looks similar to an old friend, just before dying with a smile on his face. After a very long pause and a whole lot of tears, they begin to move toward the Temple of Fate. Along the way, we learn that it was actually Hans's idea to test/frame Relonia, because a dying face doesn't lie. Hans then brings up the Black Baron Bloom, and Adlet asks him to keep it a secret, because the others would more than likely kill said person. Now, Hans doesn't like this idea, but he does agree to go along with it, for now. They meet up with Fremy and Goldoff as Adlet, not so surprisingly, looks up to see the Black Baron Bloom, a white-haired girl with a horn on her forehead and unbelievably cold eyes. Adlet simply embraces her. So, who do you think is the 7th and fake Brave? Be sure to leave a comment down below with your best guess and reasoning.